Welcome once again to AP World History. My name is Jason Epan. This is class number 3 as we continue our journey through ancient Egypt, and then we'll end up in South Asia by the end of class, or by the end of this lecture period today. Last class we talked about the variety of kingdoms and the differences between them. Today we're going to start off by talking about society, Egyptian society. Now, Egypt had cities. Of course it had cities, but it is not as city-driven as Mesopotamia, okay? But there are some famous cities throughout Egypt. For instance, there's Memphis. Memphis, as I talked about before, obviously there's a city in Tennessee today called Memphis, where a certain Elvis Presley is from, as well as Sun Records, etc., etc. But anyways, the head of the Delta. Memphis represents the head of the Delta and the unification spot between Lower and Upper Egypt. Then we've got Thebes, Thebes, that I mentioned before, that is located in Upper Egypt. That is the administrative center of Upper Egypt. Then we have Heliopolis, Heliopolis, and those very smart people think Helio and it says it must have something to do with the sun. That's true. It was the center of the sun god cult. And then we've got Tanis, Tanis, and Tanis is an important seaport on the Mediterranean. Nubia as well, also known for some famous cities. You have Kerma, Kerma, which dominated trade routes. We have Napata, Napata, which I talked about it was being the most prosperous city after the Nubian conquest of Egypt, when Egypt's society was going down after the New Kingdom. And then Meroe, Meroe. Meroe is the most influential city after the Assyrian invasion because it is farther south. Meroe and Nubia was not affected by the Assyrians when they made their push into Egypt sometime around the first millennium BCE. Okay? I mentioned before the fact that there are social classes in Egypt. I mentioned before that the pharaoh owns everything, so he owns the slaves as well, and slaves are property. Okay? I mentioned the fact there is a professional military and administrators. The Nubia class system is a little bit more complex and quite sophisticated, and there is evidence for that. All right. I mentioned before patriarchy. Still very much, it's a patriarchal society. Men are in charge. But women have more influence in both Egyptian and Nubian society than they do in Mesopotamian society. The subjugation of women started in Mesopotamia with the veil, as I talked about, but in Egyptian society, they have more freedom, and they can act, first of all, as regents. For instance, they can actually attain the status of pharaoh. That would be, a female king in Mesopotamia would not occur, but there was a female pharaoh in Egypt. Her name is Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut, God bless her, because of the fact that most people, when they see her today in some type of artistic rendition, they actually think that she is a he because she was given a mustache. Apparently, the Egyptian people were so insecure with the fact of having a female as their chief regent that they could not portray her as a female. They had to give her a beard or a mustache or some type of strong square jaw or whatever, Adam's apple, whatever is the artistic signifier of a male. And in Nubia, so in Egypt there was a pharaoh. In Nubia, it's more often where you have women as sort of the head of state. They would serve as queens, or they would serve as priestesses, and they would actually attain the role of a scribe. And a scribe is something which is very well respected because that means you can write. Okay? In terms of economic specialization and trade, I mentioned that bronze is important, but it's important because finding tin in order to combine it with copper is difficult, and thus bronze is expensive and is important. As far as iron goes, the way that you could say ancient Africa began to learn about iron was through the people in the Sudan. Remember, the country of the Sudan is south of Egypt today. Today we know of Sudan, unfortunately, for the situation in Darfur. But Sudan was known for, that's where iron began developing in Egypt, was in the Sudan. Sudan is also known for cattle, as far as the ancient, what they brought to the network, the system. And as you may imagine, there's lots of intertrade between Egypt and Nubia, a variety of goods. Nubia is known for its exotic goods, be it ebony or gold or gems and even slaves. And Egypt was known for sort of the pottery and the linen and stuff like that, and all different types of decorative items. Egypt also liked trading with the north. And for instance, they really, really like getting cedar, C-E-D-A-R, which is a type of wood. And cedar comes from Lebanon. Again, I can't believe I've mentioned this U2 album twice in 3 classes, but How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, I think, has a song called Cedars of Lebanon. So there you go, Cedar of Lebanon. As far as writing goes, whereas cuneiform was in Mesopotamia, the form of writing in Egypt was pictograph. Pictograph, P-I-C-T-O-G-R-A-P-H. And what's the most famous example of pictograph? Hieroglyphics. And I'm sure you've heard of hieroglyphics before. Capital H-I-E-R-O-G-L-Y-P-H-I-C-S. Hieroglyphics. And hieroglyphics are found on monuments, and they're also found and they're written often on papyrus. Papyrus is where hieroglyphics are written on, and they're found even as early as 3200 BCE. There is more of an everyday writing, and that was called hieratic script, H-I-E-R-A-T-I-C, and that was everyday writing that was found in Egypt from 2600 to 600 BCE. Other sort of ethnic linguistic groups had their own form of writing. There's one called Demotic, D-E-M-O-T-I-C, and there's one called Coptic, C-O-P-T-I-C. Growing up, I was very, very good friends with a Egyptian Coptic, and in fact, many of this Coptic ethno-linguistic group became Christian, and some of them migrated to the United States in order to find a more comfortable environment over there. As far as, so that's writing. Let's go on to religion. When we think of religion in ancient Egypt, obviously we think of the sun and the sun gods. 2 of the most famous sun gods are Amon, A-M-O-N, and Re, capital R-E, okay? However, there was this brief period of monotheism that's very famous in ancient Egypt. And it was developed by a pharaoh by the name of Akhenaten. And his name is, I'm trying to figure out the best way to spell it, Akhenaten. Akhenaten. Akhenaten came up with his own, I guess, god, Aten. A-T-E-N, okay? And once this monotheistic god was created, Akhenaten made sure that all other previous sun gods and other types of pagan polytheistic gods were eliminated from the record. So unfortunately, a lot of information about, Egypt's, the way the sun gods work and stuff like that is not around because Akhenaten eliminated it from history, unfortunately. He basically said, I'm going to live forever, me and Aten, we're going to just cruise the world forever, blah, blah, blah. Well, obviously, that's not the case. He died, and when he died, the people weren't too keen on supporting Aten either. So this monotheistic period is quickly wiped out in Egypt, and they go back to worshiping sun gods, etc., etc. This isn't really part of organized religion, but it's certainly part of spirituality, and you wouldn't think that a mummy would be related to spirituality, but it is. Mummification, as we know, so the body is preserved, etc., etc. Now, at first, only pharaohs are mummified, and that's during the Old Kingdom. But later on, anybody can be mummified if they want to when they die. It became available to everyone. Of course, only the wealthy can really afford it. Okay? Why is it that they get mummified? Well, obviously, it's to preserve their body. They're placed in some sort of tomb with enough food and enough jewelry so that when they wake up, and that's the idea, that they're going to be able to wake up, they will have enough food and enough, money items in order to get by. As we know, a great deal of the pharaohs, when they were buried in their great tombs, so many of their possessions and their whatever it may be that was ever dear to them was buried alongside with them as well, which is why, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, you hear about a variety of grave robbers in Egyptian pyramids and then the curses being placed on these people. Ooh. Scary, creepy. The last element about religion I want to talk about is the famous cult of Osiris. The famous cult of Osiris. Many individuals believed in the cult of Osiris because it, unlike other religions at the time, offered some idea of salvation. Okay, the cult of Osiris, O-S-I-R-I-S. The cult of Osiris offers eternal life. And what would happen is that when you die, your individual soul would merge with Osiris. The Egyptians believed that our soul, when we're dead, has a great deal of other manifestations or talents or abilities that we cannot use when we're alive. And thus, when we're dead, we're going to merge with Osiris. Now, who is Osiris? Osiris is this dude who gets murdered by his brother. It's like a Cain and Abel type of thing. This brother, Seth, murders Osiris out of jealousy. God only knows. Seth chops up the body, places in a variety of places. Osiris, though, thankfully for this story, his wife Isis, I-S-I-S, collects the body parts and then burns them, and with its ashes, she spreads them across the Nile. So it's the idea that Osiris is the protector of the Nile, the protector of agriculture, and also sort of the god of the netherworld. And those who are judged to be, you know, naughty, nasty individuals, those who did not obey the mat, as I talked about last class, M-A'-A-T, the idea of justice and social order within the community, those are the ones who are condemned to some type of hellish existence that we don't even want to know about. Okay? Anyways, that's the idea of religion. Let's move on to the last part of this chapter about ancient Egypt, and let's talk about a group of people that are not in Egypt. They're actually in eastern Nigeria or in west central Africa. And these are the Bantu people, B-A-N-T-U, the Bantu people. The Bantu people are a group of people who share similar languages, and they're from this area like I talked about. They lived on the banks of rivers. They're very accustomed to using canoes. They cultivate yams, which I mentioned before as sweet potatoes, and oil palms as well. They live in clan-based villages, and they're very good at trading with people who are not, as you would say, organized, with various hunter-gatherer peoples there in West Central Africa. Okay? What the Bantu are very much known for are their migrations. The idea they're going to move from West Central Africa, and they're going to move further east and then further south. Okay? When they move further east, they begin to integrate with the people in Sudan. And it's the Bantu who pick up a lot of techniques about iron from the people in the Sudan. And then the Bantu people have these skills, and then they share them with people all around sub-Saharan Africa, so that iron becomes a popular metal over there. Okay? And in fact, by 1000 BCE, the Bantu people occupy most of Africa south of the equator. So we're talking about stuff that's all the way up north as where the Congo River in the Great Lakes region of Africa, Central Africa is, to areas south of the equator and further down south. Okay? As I mentioned before, they're very accustomed with using canoes and moving. Now, they would only have the ability to move when they had an agricultural surplus and they can afford to take the food with them and then move from place to place. Because when they go to, you know, and they meet new people in different communities, they want to be able to exchange gifts and be friendly with them and not just be killed for their materials. Okay? As far as their society itself, one thing that we need to be aware of is that they looked at society in terms of age sets. And this becomes something very important throughout many African communities as we head into the further centuries of world history. Age sets. Age sets is the idea that whatever age you are, that should be your role within society. So, you know, if you're 25, you should do what other 25-year-olds do. You should, hang out with them, socialize with them, and also whatever they're responsible for within the community, you also are responsible for. Okay? Age sets, very important idea that is the basis of, you would say, Bantu society as well as African cultures later on. As far as religion goes in all of these various areas, it really depends on where you're talking about. Sometimes it's just, you know, they worship some single impersonal deity that would be similar to what ancient China would do, this T-I-A-N. And others would worship loads and loads of gods and deities, etc., etc. But as you may imagine, due to the Bantu, there is a great deal of intermingling and a mix of cultures. And the Bantus are people responsible for spreading out all around Africa and creating a great deal of cultures, Later on, greatly influential to the Swahili cities that are located on the eastern seaboard of Central and a little bit lower in Africa, which we'll talk about in a future chapter. Okay, so that brings us to the end of ancient Egypt, and now we're going to go on to chapter 4. And chapter 4, as I mentioned before, is South Asia. When we refer to South Asia, we're talking about the country today known as India, as well as Pakistan and Afghanistan, and maybe into like Bangladesh and areas like that. We're not talking about, you know, we would say Northeast or Far East Asia, be it the China, Korea, Japan, or even Southeast Asia with the Vietnam and Thailand. We're talking South Asia is India and Bangladesh and Pakistan and areas like that. All right? The beginnings of South Asian society is the Harappan Society, okay? The beginnings is the Dravidian people forming the Harappan Society. Let me spell that for you. Dravidian, D-R-A-V-I-D-I-A-N-S. The Dravidians formed the Harappan Society. Capital H-A-R-A-P-P-A-N. No relation to the Fish song, the rock band Fish, okay? Anyways, the Dravidians, they begin to form these Neolithic villages near the Indus River around 3000 BCE. Now, let's take that back. The Indus River is located in northwest India. In fact, a little bit of it is also located in Pakistan. So that gives you an idea of where this stuff is, okay? Now, unfortunately, we do not know a great deal about Harappan society. You would say, why? Jason, why? And I would say it's not the fault of the archaeologists. Rather, it's the fault that a great deal of their earliest remains are inaccessible because of the fact of the silt deposits, the soil deposits, and the rising water have basically, you would say, suffocated a great deal of the fossils and other information that we could possibly obtain about the Harappan society. I'll get to why that is in a moment, okay? Also about the Harappan society, we know very little about their writing. All right, we don't know how they wrote, what they wrote, etc., etc. Their writing is not yet translated, so we do not know what their writing is about and what they're communicating, okay? As I mentioned before, the foundations of Harappan society is the Indus River, very, very much so. The Indus River is sort of like the middle of the three great. Like if the best one's the Nile, then the middle one is the Indus River, and the one that causes sorrow and some people may China's sorrow, it's the Yellow River, okay? The Indus runs through North India with sources at the Hindu Kush and at the Himalayas. Very rich deposits. The only problem is that it's less predictable than the Nile. That's one of the great things about the Nile. You can predict how much and when it's going to be, but in the Indus it's a little bit less predictable, okay? As far as certain crops being grown in the Indus Valley, India is, I should say in this Indus Valley, wheat, barley, and India is known for its cotton. Egypt a little bit also with its cotton, but very much India, okay? Cotton was cultivated as early as 5000 BCE, okay? And the Dravidians have basically, by 3000 BCE, created for themselves a very complex society. Unfortunately, again, we don't know too much about that society. Not only is the writing not translated, but we have no idea what their political system was. No idea. They could have been, oh, we only know. We only know. I mean, we don't. We don't know about the political system, all right? It could have been anything. I was going to make some sort of joke, but I should just rather move on. What we do know is that Harappan society had two major cities. The first is called Harappa, capital H-A-R-A-P-P-A, and their second one is a name that for some reason why is always familiar to me, even when I was a young kid, Mohenjo-Daro, capital M-O-H-E-N-J-O and dash Daro, D-A-R-O. And what we know about these cities is that each one had a fortified citadel, okay? A citadel is some type of fortress by which it can look out and make sure, you know, protect against incoming raiders. Also had a large granary in which food can be stored. Each city had broad streets and marketplaces and standardized weights and measures and various architectural styles, etc., etc., okay? We know that there were certain social distinctions based on the living styles. We've gotten at least obtained that much information. And we do know that the ancient Dravidian religion, its religious beliefs emphasized fertility and the idea of reproduction and the idea of women giving birth to people. Yeah, first people. Unfortunately, Harappan society begins to go downhill sometime around 1900 BCE. Now, this is a great mystery. We're not exactly sure what happened. Okay? We know, what we do know is that there was some type of ecological catastrophe, some type of environmental catastrophe, all right? Because we know that the area was completely degraded, all right? There was a great deal of degradation. Now, why did it happen? Did they cut down way too many trees? Were there natural catastrophes like floods or earthquakes, okay? We're not exactly sure, but what we do know is that the population began to leave the cities somewhere around 1700 BCE as city life was becoming unsustainable because of the ecological catastrophe, okay? And by 1500 BCE, Harappan society basically collapses. It basically collapses. Some Harappan cultural traditions are going to be maintained, but others, well, there's going to be new people coming in. And this takes us to the second part of this chapter, which is the Indo-European migrations of Aryan India. Okay, I mentioned the Aryans, capital A-R-Y-A-N-S. Now, these are not very strange. Maybe we'll talk about this later on, or if you listen to European history. But these are not the same Aryans, obviously, I mean, that the Nazis and their whole eugenics things used to worship, all right? They have similar types of Indo-European roots, but obviously these people later on become very dark-skinned and dark-haired, etc., etc., okay? Anyways, let's talk about these Aryans. These Aryans depend heavily on a pastoral economy, very much so. The Aryans don't have a writing system. So Dravidians have a writing system, the Aryans do not. But what the Aryans do have is they orally transmit, and orally means through speech, they orally transmit all of their works and their beliefs. And these are called the Vedas. V-E-D-A-S, the Vedas, okay? Aryans have two different types of languages, one that would be sacred, and that's called Sanskrit. You know Sanskrit, capital S-A-N-S-K-R-I-T. And then they have a sort of a language which is more everyday and common, and that is called Prakrit, P-R-A-K-I-T. Okay? So the Aryans are beginning to enter South India, all right? South Asia, which is India, okay? And that Indus Valley, Indus Valley. The area in which they're doing so is called the Vedic Age, capital V-E-D-I-C, age, A-G-E. And the Vedic Age is in between 1500 and 500 BCE, okay? This is not an easygoing period. The Aryans are coming in, and they're coming in to dominate. They're coming in to subjugate the people. So you can imagine the Dravidians who heard tales about how they had these great cities, but they had to move out because of a catastrophe, and now you've got incoming raiders, and you've got a great deal of boisterousness, okay? The Aryans are looking at the indigenous people, the Dravidians, as dasas, D-A-S-A-S. Dasas means enemies or subject people, and later on it's going to have another meaning as well, okay? The Aryans receive a great deal of their spiritual motivation from their war god, Indra, I-N-D-R-A, okay? And these Aryans, again, these are warlike people. They're coming in, they're subjugating the native people, and frankly, they're not getting along well with each other. Each chiefdom has its own king, and the king is called a Raja, R-A-J-A. So there's lots of infighting between different Rajas and different chiefdoms, etc., etc. Okay? Aryans are known for their iron tools, and as they move in and begin to create communities in the area known today as the Punjab. Punjab is a region in India that's sort of, you would say, northwest as well, okay? Punjab today is now part of India, but it has a very keen mixture of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. For those who have seen the musical Little Orphan Annie, maybe you've seen, isn't one of Daddy Warbucks' bodyguards, is his name Punjab? Maybe named Punjab, I don't know. Anyways, the point is that he's wearing, you would say, a turban, and he is a Sikh. He is a Sikh, not a Muslim or we'll get to a description, a Muslim or a Hindu. We'll get to a description of those people at a later point in time. But what I want to talk about right now is the caste system. So the caste system, this becomes an integral part of the Aryan Dravidian intermingling community, all right? Caste, C-A-S-T-E, means hereditary, unchangeable social classes, okay? It's hereditary, which means that if you're born into a caste, the idea is that you're going to die in the caste, and we'll get to what that means. It's unchangeable, okay? Now, there are many different types of levels within the caste system. Each level, or color, is called a varna, V-A-R-N-A. Varna means color and refers to the individual social classes. Let's talk about the four main varnas. There are four of them. The first one is called the Brahmin, B-R-A-H-M-I-N-S. The Brahmins are the priests. Then we have the Kshatriyas, K-S-H-A-T-R-I-Y-A-S. The Kshatriyas are warriors and aristocrats. The third are called the Vaishyas, V-A-I-S-H-Y-A-S. The Vaishyas are cultivators, artisans, merchants, etc. And then the fourth are called the Shudras, S-H-U-D-R-A-S. And these are landless peasants and serfs. So all four of these classes are recognized, they are part of society, and each class has its own form of behavior, of proper protocol, proper etiquette. There are so many rules for each caste. For instance, there are rules about what each caste should eat, how much they should eat, intergender relationships. There's lots and lots of rules that each member of each caste must follow. Now, as you may, one thing before I move on to the but there's another element of the caste system that we all know about and don't want to be a part of, and those are the untouchables. The untouchables, and I should correct myself, the untouchables are not recognized as part of the caste system. They're there, they're around, they're dasas, okay, but they're not recognized as proper members of society. So again, four main varnas, four main social classes, okay? But the dasas are not part of the caste system. but they're there, obviously. And who are the dasas? Again, you have the slaves, the prisoners of war, people who owe money, or for whatever other reason, they are classified as that. Now, as you may imagine, when some Indo-Europeans come in, well, more and more are going to soon start to migrate, right? What are you going to have? You're going to basically be creating, there's going to be more and more people. With more and more people, you're creating more and more food. With more and more food, then you can let people start diversifying their occupational desires, right? Once you have enough food, then if somebody wants to become someone who makes pottery, they're allowed to do that, or a blacksmith, or whatever it, or miller, goldsmith, all these various professions that come about, right? Okay? Well, so what you have here is lots of new occupations being introduced into Aryan society, the Vedic age. So what they do with each social class is they start creating, with each varna, they start creating certain subdivisions within the varna. Those subdivisions are called jati, J-A-T-I. Jati refers to the subdivisions by occupation. Subdivisions are created by occupation that exist within each of the 4 major varnas. Okay? And just like, again, there are elaborate rules for every jati and every varna, etc., about how they should conduct their life. I mentioned before that it is unchangeable. If you're born a Shudras, you're going to most likely die a Shudras. There's no really such thing as social mobility. There's no Horatio Alger rags to riches story as there is in the United States. Instead, what you have is people are just, they become accustomed and they accept where they are within the social dynamic of the world, of their world, okay? Now, rarely, from time to time, there will be some movement, but movement will only be by a group. Movement will not be by an individual. Only maybe a group can move up, because that would be the desire, to move up, all right? But again, by individual, it's not going to happen. India does have a patriarchal society, very much so. And a lot of the rules of its patriarchal and patrilineal society, patrilineal, P-A-T-R-I-L-I-N-E-A-L, patrilineal means the descent runs through the man, runs through the masculine side of the family, okay? Meaning that a woman, when she gets married, she goes and lives with the husband's family, all right? A lot of the rules about gender relationships are detailed in a book called The Law Book of Manu. The Law Book of Manu, capital M-A-N-U. It was prepared by some type of anonymous sage somewhere in the 1st century BCE, so it came a little bit later on. It dealt with, again, these moral and social relationships between the genders, and unfortunately for women, it did very much subjugate women to the control and the guidance of men. Their duty is basically to bear children and to maintain the household. And it's during this time that certain odd rituals begin popping up that women were complimented if they partook in. I would say one of the most extreme of those would be the sati, S-A-T-I, when a widow, a woman, her husband dies, and she apparently cannot bear life without him, so she throws herself onto the fiery funeral pyre and obviously then commits ritualistic suicide. Again, I don't know how many people are doing that in the 21st century, but it is an ancient Vedic custom and one that a woman would be greatly honored for by her family and the people in the village if she decided to go that route. She would be memorialized, very much so. Okay? I think that's about all the time. I think we just have a little bit more time left in this class for the 30 minutes to expire. Next class, we're going to finish up talking about South Asia by talking about religions in the Vedic age, and then we're going to be moving on to Chapter 5. And Chapter 5 is all about ancient China and the various dynasties that are there, the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou dynasty. Anyway, thank you again for listening. I hope you've learned something, and I've learned something, and that's great. A brotherhood. Or sister. No, you can't be sisterhood because I'm a man. But anyways, take good care. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.